Hey everyone, this is your girl Ashley Rogers of Homes by Ashley, and you're watching another episode of Wine Wednesday. Good evening, and thanks again for joining me for another episode of Wine Wednesday with your favorite realtor of Michigan, Ashley Rogers with Homes by Ashley. So tonight, I'm really excited to have you guys with me because I want to talk about something that is very important for purchasers out there of a home, and those are the epic fees that are known as closing costs. So tonight, what I want to do is just give you guys an overview of the 7 closing costs that are typically involved in your transactions of closing your home. Now, these 7 fees are just typically your most expensive ones. So I kind of narrowed it down into small chunks so that you guys can understand each and every one of them. This is just an overview, again, just a summary. Every lending company is different. Every mortgage company is different. There are some other fees that may come into play with some mortgages. There are some that may be eliminated. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the 7 ones that I think are the most important for you to pay attention to if you are looking to purchase a home. First, we have to understand exactly what are closing costs. They're defined as a collection of fees that are required to set up and close a new mortgage. They're between 2 to 5% of the mortgage amount, and they include everything charged by your lender, the home appraiser, the title company, and any other third parties involved in the transaction. Okay, so now that we've got the definition of closing costs out of the way, I want to talk about the 7 most expensive closing costs that you want to pay attention to as a purchaser of a home. And these fees can be negotiated a lot of times depending on the lender, depending on the mortgage company. Sometimes they're flexible, sometimes they're not. So there's a little bit of variation between those, but I want you to pay attention to at least these 7 when you're in the process of purchasing your home. So let's go ahead and get started. Number 1, the origination/broker fee. This can be between 0 to 1% of the loan amount. It is defined as the lender charges for their services, and they can be heavily negotiated for most companies. So with your origination/broker fee, these are the fees that your lender is going to actually charge you for their services. They can be negotiated. Like I said, it just really depends. They usually are 0 to 1%, or not 0, but well, yeah, they can be 0 to 1% of the loan amount depending on what your lender is charging you. So that is something you really want to pay attention to. And if you're able to negotiate it, kudos. That's a really, really good thing. So that's one of the things that you do want to pay attention to when you're shopping around for your mortgage rates. Number 2, discount points. Discount points can be between 0 to 1%. Discount points are the optional upfront fees paid directly to lower your mortgage rate. You usually will pay more in closing costs in exchange for having that lower mortgage rate. 1 point is typically 1%. Which actually lowers the interest rate by 0.25%. So what exactly does that mean for you as a purchaser? It really means that you're going to have to weigh your options as to what is most important to you. Do you want to have a lower interest rate, or do you want to have lower closing costs? It really depends. You can't have one and the same most times unless you have a working of a miracle. So it really depends. But when you're using these discount points, those are upfront fees that you can pay in exchange for you having a lower interest rate, which will work more so in your favor as you go later. But again, it really depends on you as the purchaser, whether or not that is more important to you than having lower closing costs, or if having a lower interest rate is more important to you. Number 3, underwriting fees. Underwriting fees are between $300 to $900, and sometimes they can be more. This is the money that is paid to the lender's employees. The reality is that the people that work at these mortgage companies, they have to make money as well. The underwriting fees are typically what you'll be able to use to pay those people. So those are going to be possibly, you can negotiate those. It really, again, depends on the lender, but they have to make money. The employees have to make money. The company has to make money. So there's that. Number 4, title search and title insurance. Now, this can range between $300 to $2,500 plus, and these are the fees that are paid to check the home's history to make sure that the home can be transferred to you legally. That is something that's very, very important. You want to make sure that the home that you're purchasing has a 100% clear title. There's nothing on there that could possibly come back later to jeopardize the ownership of the home for you and your family. So you don't want that to happen. So it's very important that you do have a clear title, but it costs to have the people search to make sure that you have a clear title. You can go back far as all get up to find out what's going on with the home, or make sure there's nothing or anyone tied to the home to prevent you from legally having a clear title. Very important. So again, that can range between $300 to $2,500, sometimes more. But you want to make sure you have a clear title at the end of the day. So don't shudder on the cost of that because you need it. Number 5, escrow fees. These will be between $350 to $1,000+. Escrow fees are the fees that are paid to third-party escrow companies that handle the funds and they facilitate the home sale. When you're in a transaction, one of the things that you put down or might want to put down is called an earnest money deposit. This is what I equate to kind of like an engagement ring prior to the actual ring. You give the engagement ring to prove like, hey, I really want to make this work with you. I'm serious about it. So the earnest money deposit is the same thing, but you need a place to hold that earnest money deposit, which is typically the escrow companies. Escrow companies are third parties that are outside of a lending company most times, and you do have to pay closing cost fees to go towards that. So that is some place that you can keep your earnest money deposit, and also some other monies if you want to use those in the transaction as well. Number 6, the home appraisal. Very, very important, because the last thing you want to do is be offering a purchase price on something that's not even worth that amount. They don't want to do that. The home appraisal is where the lending company will have a specified person that's been licensed to do appraisals, and they are going to look into the value of the home and find out what the true market value of that home is. So the home appraisal can range between $500 to $1,000 and sometimes more. Most times that is going to not only depend on your loan amount, but that's also going to depend on the property, how much the property is worth, how much the list price of the property. There are different things that can affect the cost of a home appraisal, but I would never tell anyone to skimp on the home appraisal. That's something that you definitely want to make sure that you do, because you want to make sure that the cost of the home and the value of the home is coinciding with what it is that you're offering. And last but not least, number 7, prepaid taxes and insurance. Now, these are between $1,000 to $4,500 and sometimes more. Generally speaking, a buyer is going to pay 6 months to a year of property taxes and homeowners insurance in advance when they close. What that means is that, let's say for instance, there is a home that's on the market in January. Your buyer sees it, or you as the buyer, you see this home, you put your offer in, and then you begin the process from beginning all the way to close. Now, during that time that this is going on, there's a good chance that the previous homeowners have paid some of the taxes up front. So what you will have to do as the buyer, the new buyer, and the new owner of the home, you're going to have to pay back some of those taxes. You may have to pay back taxes. You may have to pay them ahead. They can either be a credit to the previous owner, or they can be a debit that's going to go back to you if you paid those up front. That's just something that's a little bit more complicated, and I will save that for another day. But those are things that you definitely want to be mindful of. So this was just, like I said, a summary of my top 7 closing costs that I think are the most expensive, and those are the ones that you want to pay attention to the most. So this is just a general summary of it. In another video, I'll probably go into more detail about some of those other costs, but you have an idea of where this all comes down to be. Another side note that I want to say is, when it comes to closing costs, I want to remind you buyers that your closing costs and your deposit are going to be something completely different. By deposit, I mean your down payment. Your down payment is not going to be the same as your closing costs, and typically you cannot lump those things together. So those are 2 separate things, and you want to make sure that you know that, because sometimes buyers think that your down payment is going to also include your closing costs. Doesn't work that way. But if you put down an earnest money deposit that's being held by a third-party escrow company, then you can possibly use that money to go towards your closing costs. But again, completely separate. And one of the final notes that I want to leave with you buyers as well is that these fees, they can be negotiated depending on the lending company that you use or the mortgage company that you go through for your home financing. There is a chance that you can possibly negotiate some of those fees. You can possibly negotiate those fees to be completely taken off or lowered. It really just depends on the mortgage company and how hard your realtor is fighting for you to see if you can kind of probably get some seller's concessions to pay for those as well. But again, your closing costs are from 1% to 5% of the loan amount. So when you're thinking about purchasing a home, you have your earnest money deposit, you have your down payment on your loan, and then you also want to make sure that you have set aside some extra money between 1 to 5% of the loan amount for those closing costs. You may use it all, you may not, but you want to make sure that you're prepared to have that money for your closing costs, because you're not going to get the keys to those homes if you don't have those things taken care of. So that is the end of this episode of Wine Wednesday, guys. I'm so thankful that you joined me to learn about closing costs, or learn a little bit about closing costs. But thanks again for joining me on this episode of Wine Wednesday, and I will see you guys next week on the flip side.